Hey Candace, how are you?
Hi, Luis. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm well. I'm enjoying the day. The sun's out, so I can't complain. But where do you find yourself in the world right now?
Well, I live in rural Earhart, Minnesota, which is west central Minnesota, kind of in the middle of nowhere on 20 acres and a lake and a really wonderful natural environment to inspire me.
Are you from there?
No, I was born in Kansas, but my family moved from Kansas when I was 2, and I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I have a real desert aesthetic and connection to the Southwest that is pretty deep in my roots. But Minnesota has become my newest home. I moved here in 2004, and so it's quickly becoming the place that I've lived the longest. So Minnesota definitely does feel like a home space for me now.
It sounds bucolic. It sounds really exciting, and I really want to go visit you at some point.
I would love that. We love hosting all kinds of visitors. Basically, anybody who is in the quest for creativity and social justice and changing the world in magical ways are the folks that we want to invite to our place. So, certainly welcome anytime you're in our neighborhood or neck of the woods.
I appreciate, and that's exactly why I wanted to connect with you because you had a show. You created a show in this odd time in the world, and it really felt really magical. Can you tell us a little bit about what the show entails and where it's taking place?
Yeah, so I need to take a step back and just share with you that I was a professor in my previous life. So I moved to Minnesota in 2004 to go to graduate school, where I earned a PhD in Feminist Studies from the University of Minnesota. And after I finished that, I taught at a regional university in Moorhead, Minnesota for almost 10 years. And a couple of years ago, I was on sabbatical, and on a whim, I was in the middle of a writing project, so working on a book length manuscript. And I decided I was really tired of words and just like so in the thick of reading and writing and wrestling sentences together. And I decided to take a class at the local community college, which was a Foundations of Three-Dimensional Art class, just to see if I could like think a little bit more differently or expansively about really the question that I've been thinking a lot about around how do narratives hold power in our society and to what ends, and can we use them as powerful social justice tools. And so I took this class at the community college, and I fell in love with the way making things pushed me to think further than I had ever felt like I had been challenged mentally and intellectually. And so then I decided that I would try to pursue a degree at community college. So the show that I put on is my, graduation exhibition that would have been up in our local historical museum for about a month. It was scheduled to go up at the end of March and run through the end of April. And I was supposed to have, a closing talk, an exhibition, gallery kind of walkthrough and discussion. And sadly, because of the state of a global pandemic, that was canceled for obvious reasons. But as part of that class, I still had to launch a website. And as I was taking photographs of my paintings and hanging them on the wall, I realized that I have the space in my huge house to just mount the show and try to figure out a way to share it digitally. And I'm so glad that I did. I feel like it's really the first opportunity that I've had where I'm putting my work out there, like on a, more major scale than what I had previously. I've had a couple of pieces in different shows along the way of my education towards this degree, but it's kind of something different when you're curating an idea and working on a series and trying to think about how that all works together. And so the series is called Interior Intimacies, And it's really trying to examine the relationship that I have to the space that I live in with my lovely wife, Liz, in rural Minnesota. Like, what is it like to try to think about a lesbian lifestyle in a rural place?
Well, can I just tell you that I follow you on Instagram? I see your postings of really delicious food, of like pastoral landscapes, and I've read in your comments that you guys are out in the woods, in this secluded environment. So I have this like romantic idea of both of you in this perfect little strip of land with your animals and nature and just living your best life. And it's such a beautiful notion to think, yeah, that happens, you know? So I love seeing your posts, and it's so encouraging and important to document, really.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really fascinated with space and our relationship to space. You know, I think as a Chicana who grew up in the Southwest, who has original roots in the Midwest, I was born in Kansas. All of my Mexican American family live in Kansas. And so I had this really strange kind of growing up where I was in a majority, you know, people call themselves Hispanic, mostly in New Mexico environment, growing up. But all of my ties to my Mexican heritage were from Kansas, of all places. And then I moved to the middle of nowhere in Minnesota. That is, of course, somewhere that has a lot of deep importance to me now. But it is really interesting to think about what is our relationship to space and how does that really shape our understandings of ourselves. And, you know, as a Chicana femme, I'm also really interested in thinking about what does that mean for our gender? What does that mean for our sexuality? What does that mean for our responsibilities to the land? All kinds of questions I'm really trying to explore.
Well, when I saw your posting, it really grabbed me on several levels. One, I recognize that you really created an opportunity for yourself that I find as people of color, Latinx, we constantly have to do and kind of create space for ourselves. And what better way to do it than at your own home, on your own terms? You can hang it to your own eye level. You know, no one's going to do it higher or lower. So there's all these empowering gestures that go along with creating your own opportunities and blasting a door for yourself. On another level, I recognize the imagery, you know, and not because you followed a canon, just because there was this essence that I was like, oh, I recognize it's calling me this essence because I'm Mexican, I'm Chicano, and I also know in the narrative of a two female spirit relationship, being like, wow, right, it's like this other dimension to this, the essence of this tradition, right? Which is so powerful to be able to see that and to be able to share that. Can you tell me a little bit about how it's been received or how you can connect it to that broader tradition?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm so glad that you're seeing that from the little
Absolutely.
screen of
Yeah.
your iPhone. How wonderful that Instagram can bring us together in these
Absolutely.
times. Well, you know, interestingly, let me start there. I love Instagram for its community building possibilities. You know, I found you through there from an interview that you had done with Gabrielle, like a long time ago, it seems like, in your show. And it was just so great to see, like, two queer Chicanos, like, talking about, like, the realities of our complex places in the world. So Instagram has been a real lifesaver for me at different parts in my life.
I agree.
A few years ago, you know, I did a 365 feminist selfie challenge where I was taking a picture of myself and posting it on my feed. And then, you know, I've done other things where I just document my breakfast every single day because breakfast brings me so much joy. And these projects have actually really come together in interesting ways. I'm noticing in my own artistic sensibilities. And it kind of comes out in some of the artist statements that I've written recently, again, for some of my class projects. But, you know, we often associate femininity with really frivolity. And as I spend my life with another woman and I really have a deep connection to my feminine self, I feel like highlighting and challenging the ways that we see things like food or furnishings or fashion as an opportunity to read as politically challenging our status quo notions of femininity. It's just really powerful for me. And I think I'm trying to bring that out in a little part of the work that I do right now with this painting series in particular. And so I made the canvases square on purpose to mimic the ways that we live this really public part of our lives that are showing our private interior spaces, our interior selves that get curated and managed and polished in lots of ways and then put out into Instagram. And so, I'm just really drawn to the legacy of art history and like really trying to challenge that canon as well, in a couple of ways. One, in the delegitimization of genre paintings. You know, when we think about what kind of paintings are important, we think about portraits maybe now, or we think about, you know, these large history paintings of Western white notions of history and conquest and white interpretations of religious stories. And I think there's magic in expanding our notions of thinking about what is our relationship to space and building kind of a monumental relationship to that on the canvas is super interesting. So they're 48 by 48 inches. And so it becomes a really immersive experience when you walk up to the canvas because you can't really see beyond the room that you kind of walk into. And so, yeah, I am really playing around with all of that. And then the connection to my Chicana roots, I think, just come out in really unexpected ways for folks. And so I did host a virtual conversation I serve on a board of directors for a foundation in rural Minnesota. And I hosted a conversation about my art with them as like a team building experience during our COVID crisis. And it was so wonderful to see their responses. And like you, one of my friends who is not Chicana, she's Norwegian American, she was like, these read so Chicana to me. And I said, you know, well, I am a Chicana. The art I make is Chicana art, you know? But I think there's something about the use of color, the use of these icons, like the iconography that I'm trying to integrate into the work through the fabric pieces, the mixed media elements of my canvases that really let people in to glimpse what does like a Chicana life look like, you know? It's like we have a molcajete on our counter. Like
Right.
We have these markers of like who we are that don't seem like we shouldn't have to be at the stage where that kind of representation becomes a political act, but sadly we still are, right? Either when we think about that in the art world or even the mainstream media.
I think it's so interesting. I find that everything normal that I do, normal, is a political act, right? The fact that I can, I don't know, live in a particular kind of neighborhood and do particularly normal things that I wasn't set up to do because the system is just not set up for me in that way is very political, right? And even in the art we create, if I paint a painting or make a collage about pillows, is it still Chicano art? Is it still gay art? You know, I mean, even thinking about that, yeah, okay, I already found all these connections, but you know, it's a question that I often ask, and I'll pose it to you as well. Do you find that your work is intrinsically queer art or feminist art or Chicano art? What do you think about that?
Yeah, as somebody with a PhD in feminist studies, I am super committed to the legacy of feminist art and queer art. And I think a lot about like Jose Esteban Munoz's queer futurality and like utopic opportunities that we can make through expressing futures for queer folks that are free of violence and are the landscapes that we deserve, the communities that we deserve, and thinking about that as a way to bring it into the visual images that I make, it feels so powerful and so necessary. And especially in my, rural environment that I'm living in. It's not like I get to see a lot of this art that I want to see on the walls in my local communities. And so I guess I've taken that upon myself to make the art that I want to see on these gallery walls. So absolutely, my work is political. I don't shy away from that. I embrace it, all of the contradictions that are a part of that, and really, lean into that. Like, yeah, I'm a queer Chicana feminist, and the work that I do from writing to my visual arts work is always going to be connected to those legacies of articulating a world that we all deserve.
I love that. And I think in this reset that we're going through with the pandemic, I don't feel is even halfway through, imagining the future, right? What does that look like? Do you think in a world that that everyone has a place, that everyone has a voice, that everyone has this safe space that we've been talking about so much in the past few years, what does that look like? And I know that you actively are creating this space. How can other places create this new future for not only people of color, but just together as a cohesive community?
That's such a beautiful question. I'm constantly inspired by the work of Octavia Butler and other, queer, Black, Indigenous, people of color, science fiction writers who have really given us maps to do this. Adrienne Maree Brown's work on pleasure activism is something I've been thinking a lot about as well. Just, again, how do we create these spaces where we can really center joy and pleasure and the happy warrior in these times that are really hard on people, right? And I recognize that I have a pretty significant level of privilege to be able to have the space to create, to continue to, be able to pay my bills because my spouse has a stable job right now and is considered an essential worker. And I guess when I think about how do we create these opportunities for others, it really is about how can we leverage this moment where we are all forced to slow down. I think what I'm hearing from people is that they're so grateful to spend more time with their families, at home, with their kids, with their spouses, that they're able to tend their gardens and, kind of take a step outside of the capitalist machinations that force us to always be busy, busy, busy to the detriment of our mental and physical wellness. I'm really committed to a world in which we all have that space. And I think regardless of the professions that we go into, every single one of us deserves that space. And so for me, it's about how do we open up opportunities for us to hang on to these wonderful changes that have come because of COVID-19 or this global pandemic, and how do we not let that deficit mindset come back into our perspective that say things like, oh, it's too much money to continue to do this. I think it's going to require all of us to do some massive intellectual shifts in terms of what do we really value. And clearly our capitalist system is not working for everyone. It was never set up to work for everyone. And so how can we continue to do that education to help highlight the need for that systemic and structural change across all of these different levels of our society? I know I'm asking you a lot of questions, but these are the sorts of things that I'm really thinking about in these times.
Absolutely. Likewise. And I think you absolutely hit it in the nail when you said it takes commitment. And I think people really have to commit to the idea of a restart, a refresh, of taking a moment to reflect. I heard a lecture recently where it was a bunch of professors talking about, we're not working from home. We are going through a pandemic and trying to work from home, because automatically we went to the shift. Okay, how do you keep working at home? My husband is working as we speak, still 12-hour days on his computer. Where does that give you time to process? Where does that give you time to kind of recalibrate? Because that's what needs to happen, a recalibration, right? So it takes commitment. And I think I'm excited to know that you're around making these things happen as well and influencing people. Because, when we think about the Chicano community, Chicanx community, we think of the coasts, and we don't really think about what's happening in the middle, right? So has it been easy for you to find community, to build community? How has your community come about?
That's a great question. So, Minneapolis is a real hub of Chicanx and Latinx artistic cultural production. So there are community members there that I can say, I consider a part of my community. I'm so grateful to be connected to those folks. And that's a 3-hour drive from where I am. And so finding community is really interesting in these times. But again, I'm not always an optimist, but I do appreciate how this shift has opened up opportunities for digitally connecting with people like you, right, who lives on a coast, connecting with other folks who I'm unable to physically be in space together, pandemic or not. So attending lectures and thinking about seeing other people's artist talks, or, visiting museums' digital collections now in ways that are actually really great for those of us who live outside of those environments, because it's opened up access for us in ways that we didn't previously have before. And so, when we think about moving forward, I hope that we continue to hold on to those things, right? Those are accessibility issues. Those are equity issues, like in terms of who can access spaces and knowledge and be a part of those conversations. And so I do see our digital organizing as an important arm of how do we hold on to some of that, right? So it's just as easy for someone in New York City to see my work in my home gallery as it is for me to visit the Met's online collection.
Isn't that amazing? You can put both links back to back.
Totally. Or that's how I'll get into the Whitney. I'll just put my link right underneath the
Completely.
Whitney link.
Yeah, I'll do that in the show notes, actually. It's so funny. I was talking to this professor. She's the chair of the English department at a college in LA. And we were talking about community and how we use this word community. We've always used it. And she said, it's not only about community, but it's also about connecting to the right people to then not only build communities, but build coalitions. And it kind of floored me to think, oh, right. It's not just about finding all these people who are like you or who support you, but what do you do with that support, right? What actions can we take to create everything we've been talking about? So I'm really, again, really excited to know that you're doing stuff and that you have these people who are mobilized to really create something special in your region and sharing it outward, because I think that's so important. Now, let me ask you, everything else aside, where's the first place you're going to go to once this is over, this whole pandemic thing?
Probably the library. So I'm a huge nerd. And I would say maybe about 10 days into, stay at home protocols, I was like, I miss my libraries. There's 3 libraries that I kind of have in rotation, partly as a student, but also just as an intellectual. I try to read on, and all of that informs my creative process.
Wow.
And so I really, really miss the library, and probably will head there first thing that I can and reunite with my book friends. I actually am as somebody who's really interested in our relationship to things, I feel like there's something for me to explore there in terms of my love of books and my relationship to books and the space of the library that houses them. So
Gee, that just that's beautiful. Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I mean, I think my fondest memories of being a kid are at libraries. I used to ditch school and go to the library. Like that. That's
oh my gosh.
then I check out the books and go hang out at the local hotels and smoke and read. That was my
I
experience as
love
a kid.
that.
Yeah, it was so much fun. That's really funny. Now, can you share with me perhaps one of your first experiences with art that really kind of cemented this idea that this is something I want to be part of?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about that. And, growing up, I didn't really have a lot of opportunities to explore art formally. When I went to school, I went to the University of Kansas to do an undergraduate degree, and I had two majors and a minor. And there was no way I was going to be fitting any sort of formal artistic study in alongside those degrees. And I had this really unfortunate experience when I was young where my brother is super smart and was immediately accepted into the gifted program at our public elementary school. And to get in, you had to take this test. And I took the test like the 3 years in a row to try to get into the gifted program because my parents just really wanted that for me. And I failed it. It's probably the only test I've ever failed in my life. And it's been a really formative experience for me as a high achiever. But and for whether or not this is true, what my memory recalls of the reason why I failed it the third and final time was because I wasn't creative enough in my problem solving solutions for this puzzle that we had to do. And so when you're, 10 and you hear this feedback that you're not creative, that kind of sticks with you for a while. And I carried that with me for a long time and just kind of peripherally connected to creativity. Like I love to cook and bake and put different ingredients together in the kitchen. And I would say that's totally, using your creative self. And so that's probably where I first started kind of getting into that. And then when I was working on my dissertation, as I was finishing my graduate program, I joined a creative writing group of women of color writers in the Twin Cities. And that really just gave me another spark. Like there is a way to write that isn't just this formal academic style. And I owe it to my reader to make my writing engaging and entertaining and something that brings joy. And so I would say that was probably my first real kind of shift. And then also during graduate school, I have to mention my really good friend Alex, another Chicana at the U of M in a different program. We became really great friends, and one of the ways that we would de-stress was by hosting a Chicana craft day. And so we would make kind of like folk art inspired wooden painted objects or molding clay or embroidering. And so that really also just became an opportunity for me to say like, oh, I really kind of like making things with my hands, and I really like designing things, and I like thinking about how do these colors work together. And so that also was one of those formative moments where I kind of was maybe giving myself permission to create, and kind of taking back my poor little 9-year-old self who had been told, like, you're not meant for this.
Well, that's so powerful that you did that because you didn't take it as a stop sign. You took it as a framework to kind of just stem from there. That's such a powerful story. It's so
Yeah,
funny.
thank you.
I'm wondering,
Yeah,
right? It's like, whoa, this is your planter box where you get to grow from.
totally.
It's really funny as I hear you talking about academia. I came from a academic background, and I totally said, forget it, I hate it, no way. And as I've met so many artists, some who have been academically trained, some who have not, the people who have not gone to art school always have this shadow of like, oh, I should have gone to art school and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, whoa, but you guys have so many less hangups. You guys are like doing so many amazing things. But it's funny because on the other side of that coin, people who come from academia also carry this shadow of what to do, of what's right and what's not, what tone to use. And I'm just wondering how did you come? You seem to be at a very good place with these two things, right? Academia and just being an artist and being creative. How have you been able to meld those two things together?
Well, I did quit a tenured professor position to pursue my artistic dreams.
Yes, well done. We can stop now. Print. Yes, there's the answer
So
I was looking for.
yeah, I don't know how well I've melded them both together. I think I'm still trying to figure that out, like all of us, you know. I do want to say that I love teaching, and I think teaching is incredible and also a space for creativity, right? Like a good professor creatively maps out a 16-week schedule for their students to get from one place to the next. And does that, like, you know, with power and grace and beauty. And I love that also in my creative magic making self. But, you know, I think it's really interesting. I consider myself a public scholar. I still am working on a full-length book manuscript that's, you know, out for review with an academic press right now. I have these connections to ideas and words, and in my, you know, small way of going to art school, I have also been super interested in the field of art history and how we make sense of what we consider to be aesthetically pleasing, and how do we continue to carry these conventions with us in the realm of art school, right? Like, why do we learn how to draw in particular ways, or why do we do what we do, is a real fundamental question that I ask myself all the time. I'm not sure, you know, if that's part of that academic in me that's just always about trying to drill down to like the why and the what and the how. But I guess I think I am moving into my 40s, you know, in a couple of years, I'll be in my fourth decade. And I think that's also just bringing me more wisdoms, right? Like helping me let go of that sense of needing to know everything in order to make something.
Right.
Or trying to build better discernment processes through, okay, what can I take from this to inform this? Or why am I engaging with this in this particular way, and to what end? So, yeah, I guess those are just the questions that I use. And I'm really grappling right now with, you know, do I want to try to pursue an MFA, and why, you know? So I think I'm still kind of with these artists that you've talked to in that camp of, you know, what does that give you? Why would you want to do that? Obviously, I am not going to pursue that and add any more student debt to my load. So, like,
good choice. Yeah.
How to do that?
Right.
Yeah, how to do that becomes the question, and why. So, yeah, I think I'm right there with you. Like, you know, I think you had an episode about like imposter syndrome and thinking about like you're not good enough as an artist. And I think as like Chicanx, Latinx people, we get that message about whatever we do. Like, we're not as good as writers. We're not good enough at X, Y, and Z. And so I guess I'm just trying to figure out, like, I'm always going to feel that way. And I just need to push through and make the art that I want to make and leave the legacy behind that I want to leave behind.
Oh, that's where you segued right into the next question I had for you. As you were talking about age, I was really thinking about, you know, as queer people who often don't have children, what is the legacy, do you think, that your work, your life's work, or what would you like it to be for the next Chicanx person that comes along, that will be standing on your shoulders, per se?
Yeah, I guess I want to be the cool queer auntie, you know,
Achieved.
who Absolutely, who lives this eclectic life in the woods with her wife and does whatever the fuck she wants.
Right on. I love it.
So I think, my legacy is really about living my most authentic self. I think that's what my life is really about. And it's taken me, and I think it will continue to take me my entire lifetime to get to that place. And making visual art helps me get closer to that. It helps me get in touch with parts of myself that I didn't even know were a part of me. Like I didn't know that I had these paintings in me, and there's 4 more that are coming, and I didn't know that I had this ability to put paint on a canvas and make something out of it. And I think it just helps me let go in ways that are really important. Like the process of painting is something that I think forces me to let go of my sense of control in really powerful and meaningful ways. And if I can share that with other people and be the example of, living that more balanced life between change and embracing change and accepting what comes, that sounds like a really good legacy for me.
Yeah, cheers to that. Cheers to that. Well, in closing, I'm going to ask you a really hard question. Are you ready?
Okay. Yes, ready.
Can you recommend 2 books that have touched you in some way and that you'd save if you were going to run out of the fire?
Oh man, that is a really hard question. I'm glad that you prefaced that. Well, so Gloria Anzaldua's Borderlands La Frontera is a classic that, every Chicanx Latinx person probably already knows about. But I would say, Gloria Anzaldua's work is so interesting to me. I don't know if you know, but she studied art. She got her bachelor's degree in visual arts.
I had no idea.
And yeah,
Wow.
and so I know that in her work, she often will have drawings or illustrations that also accompany her theories. But I just had this really intense epiphany the other day when I was reading an interview of her with her in a book, where she basically, I think her writing process really mirrors the process of artistic making. Like, she visualizes it, she plays around with it, she finesses it, and it's, not to say that doesn't happen in writing, but as I was reading her words, I just was so inspired by thinking about, what if that's the power of why her words are so powerful, because she comes from this really artistic way of problem solving and thinking that I don't think a lot of writers do. And so that book has just been kind of on my mind.
Well, that makes so much sense. And just to add to that conversation, I really feel that artist / anything is such a powerful thing, right? If you're an artist and you're a teacher, wow. If you're an artist and you're a real estate agent, wow. I mean, you bring so much soul to it, And it isn't always the same way when it's the other way around. If you're a businessman / artist, then the priorities and sensibilities are different. But when you're an artist at heart, when you're an artist, your essence is an artist soul, you bring such a different quality to your projects, to the things you create, right? So it makes perfect sense that she would have been an artist creating these sentences, these prose. Wow, that's great. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I'm really in love with that. And thinking about that could be another book project or a graphic novel, I think would be really great.
Yes. What's your second book?
Oh man. I mean, as I shared, I read so many books, and so it's so hard. Do you save a classic? Do you save something that's really powerful right now? But I guess I would say I've been really, I had mentioned it earlier, but Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Pleasure Activism, has been really informing my ideas of how do I show up in the world? How do we really center pleasure as not only something that all humans need, sexual or otherwise, but how do we incorporate an idea of pleasure as a grounding value and principle of everything we do? And you had an episode where you talked a lot about play, and I think that's really connected to pleasure, right?
Right.
That
Yeah.
where and how do we really put that into our lives in our busy days? I think so often we don't play. Like we don't spend enough time really just like playing and being and exploring what brings us deep joy and a tingle, right?
I love
And
that.
so I love a tingle. I mean,
Absolutely.
in all kinds of ways. And so, yeah, it's a queer and feminist project to say boldly, like, I want to live a life of pleasure. And again, to not demean pleasure as something that's frivolous, but to really ground it as a value that you use as an operating principle, I think is really powerful. So.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, let's go get those books now. Kandace, thank you for your time. Thank you for showing up and doing these amazing things that you're doing. I will be rooting all the way from New York and hope to connect at some point.
Thanks, Luis. I would love to connect anytime. I love New York, so next time I'm in the area, I'll look you up.
Cheers.
Cheers.